I didn't raise my voice, I didn't have to. In the army, you learn that the man who screams is usually the man who's lost control. I just looked at Darlene, let the silence stretch until it felt heavy, and walked back inside. The next 48 hours were the kind of quiet that precedes a landslide. I wasn't just sitting on my porch, I was preparing. I spent the morning at the county clerk's office, pulling every recorded easement and property survey for the last 30 years. I spent the afternoon on the phone with my old co's brother, a property litigator who specialized in unreasonable interference. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon on Friday, I had a binder that was less of a collection of papers and more of a tactical map. Saturday morning arrived with a stillness that felt brittle. At exactly 9:00 a.m. I heard it, the high-pitched metallic whine of a power drill. I didn't rush. I took a slow sip of my coffee, adjusted the cuffs of my shirt, and stepped out onto the patio. It was a scene straight out of a low-budget heist movie. Darlene was there, dressed in a crisp white blouse as if she were hosting a garden party, gripping a Ryobi drill like a weapon. Jean stood beside her, holding a level and a box of oversized galvanized bolts. Marge, as always, was the silent witness, her phone aimed at my face the moment the sliding door creaked open. They were already 3 holes deep into the main support post of my brand-new safety fence. "Morning, Darlene," I said, my voice as flat as a desert floor. "I don't remember scheduling a demolition crew today." Darlene didn't even flinch. She kept the drill pressed against the aluminum metal shavings spiraling down onto my pristine concrete. "This fence is 4 inches over the height limit for decorative barriers, David. We sent the notice. You didn't comply. Under Article 4, Section B of the HOA covenant, the board has the right to abate any non-conforming structure at the owner's expense." "Article 4 covers decorative barriers," I said, leaning against the railing. I felt the slight weight of the phone in my pocket. The line was already open. "This isn't a decorative barrier, it's a Grade A safety enclosure mandated by State Statute 515.27. I told you that in the email you ignored." "State law doesn't trump community aesthetics," Gene chimed in, his voice cracking slightly. He looked nervous, but Darlene's presence seemed to act as his spine. "We have a look to maintain." "You're drilling holes in a certified safety structure, Darlene," I said, ignoring Jean. I caught a glimpse of Marge's phone screen. She was live streaming this to the private neighborhood Facebook group. "Perfect. That fence is under tension. You compromise that post and the integrity of the child safety latch fails. You're not abating a nuisance, you're creating a liability." Darlene finally stopped the drill. She turned to me, her eyes bright with a terrifying kind of entitlement. "What I am doing, David, is reclaiming this neighborhood from people who think they can bring military precision into a space where it doesn't belong. You think you're still in charge of a platoon? You're not. You're a member of an association, and in this association I am the law." She turned back and pulled the trigger. The drill screamed. "Well," I said, checking my watch, "I suppose that's all the intent we need." Right on cue, a white and blue cruiser rounded the corner, its tires crunching on the gravel. It didn't have its sirens on, but the blue lights were pulsing, casting rhythmic shadows across Darlene's white blouse. She froze. The drill stayed pressed against the metal, but her finger went limp on the trigger. Deputy Miller stepped out. He was a big man, the kind who didn't need to puff his chest out to look intimidating. He walked up the driveway with a slow, measured gait that suggested he'd seen a lot of stupid things in his career, and this was about to be one of them. "Everything okay here?" Miller asked, his eyes immediately locking onto the drill in Darlene's hand. "Officer, thank goodness," Darlene said, her voice instantly shifting into the tone of a concerned grandmother. She stepped away from the fence, smoothing her hair. "We're just performing a mandatory maintenance correction. This homeowner has been incredibly hostile regarding community standards." Miller looked at me. I just nodded. "Morning, Greg." Darlene's face went slightly pale. You know him." "He's a veteran, ma'am. I see him at the VFW," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "But more importantly, I'm looking at a 911 dispatch for active destruction of property and trespassing. And I'm looking at you holding a power tool against a fence that clearly doesn't belong to you." "I have the right," Darlene snapped, the mask of the polite neighbor slipping. "The bylaws." "The bylaws don't authorize you to bypass the judicial process and commit vandalism," Miller interrupted. He looked at the holes in the fence. "David, you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. Darlene let out a sharp, triumphant breath. "See, he knows he's in the wrong." "I'm not pressing charges for the vandalism yet," I continued, stepping down from the porch. I pulled the thick binder from behind my back and handed it to the deputy. Because I'd rather wait until the city building inspector and the fire marshal arrive. They should be here in about 3 minutes. The silence that followed was absolute. Jean actually dropped the box of bolts. Why would the fire marshal be coming to a fence dispute? Marge asked, her phone finally dipping toward the ground. I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent 3 nights mapping out a minefield. See, Darlene, while you were busy measuring my grass, I was doing some measuring of my own. I noticed that the community clubhouse and the beautification walls you had installed last year at the entrance seemed a little close to the road. Darlene's hand started to shake. I pulled the original city plats, I said, my voice low and steady. It turns out the HOA board under your direction built those stone pillars and the new gate system 6 feet into the city's emergency vehicle right-of-way, which is a major code violation, but that's not the best part. I stepped closer to her. She smelled like expensive perfume and panic. I also looked into the safety compliance fund you used to pay for those walls, I said. The one Jean manages, it's funny. The contractor listed on the invoice is D&B Masonry. D&B Darlene and Bob, your husband's company, right? You used community dues to pay your own husband to build an illegal structure on city land. The color didn't just leave Darlene's face, it seemed to leave her entire body. She looked like she might collapse into the pool. Jean was backing away toward the sidewalk. His holy book of bylaws clutched to his chest like a shield that had suddenly turned into lead. The city inspector is here to red tag the clubhouse, I said, pointing to a dark SUV pulling up behind the cruiser. And the fire marshal is here to issue the fine for obstructing emergency access. Last I checked, the fine is $5,000 a day until the structures are demolished. At the HOA's expense, of course. You destroy the neighborhood's finances just to spite me, Darlene whispered, her voice trembling. No, I said, leaning in so only she could hear me. I'm protecting my boundaries, you should have respected yours. The next hour was a masterclass in bureaucratic carnage. The city inspector didn't just red tag the walls, he found 4 more violations in the common areas that Darlene had personally overseen to save money. The fire marshal was even less impressed, especially when he realized the HOA's new gate wouldn't open for his master override key. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook group, the one Marge had been live streaming to, was a war zone. The livestream had captured Darlene's confession of "I am the law" and the deputy's warning about vandalism. The homeowners were already calling for an emergency meeting to strip the board of their power and investigate the D&B Masonry invoices. Darlene, Jean, and Marge stood on the sidewalk, watching as a city crew placed orange cones around their beautiful entrance gate. They looked small. For the first time since I'd moved in, they looked like the ordinary, insecure people they actually were. I walked over to the edge of my property, where the 3 holes were still gaping in my fence post. Darlene, I called out. She turned, her eyes red-rimmed. I'll be sending the bill for the fence replacement to your personal address, not the HOA's, I said calmly. And if I see a single clipboard near my property line ever again, I won't call the deputy. I'll call the district attorney about that masonry contract. Do we have an aesthetic understanding? She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked away, her heels clicking rapidly on the asphalt, a defeated general retreating from a war she never should have started. I watched them go until they were out of sight. Then I turned back to my yard. The sun was high now, reflecting off the surface of the pool, turning the water into a sheet of pure, unbroken glass. It was quiet, truly quiet. I sat down on the edge of the deck, kicked off my shoes, and let my feet sink into the cool, clear water. The past was where it belonged. The boundaries were set, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel like I was waiting for an explosion. I was just home.